The sound was wrong. Not loud, just wrong, a soft tick under the wheel once every turn, like a stone caught in a boot. It was 10 minutes past 4 in the morning in an empty machine shop in Wichita, and Wes Callahan had been mopping the same 40 feet of concrete for 11 years' worth of nights in one form or another, and he had learned to trust his ears more than his eyes. He crouched. He put his hand flat on the ramp and felt the cold come up through his palm. Then he looked at the small front wheel of the chair parked at the top of the ramp, and the bottom fell out of the night. Rosalind Keel was going to be sitting in that chair in 3 hours. Nobody in that building knew what he was looking at except him. If you're already leaning in, tap the like button, and while you're down there, tell me about the one person in your life who refused to quit on you. Name them for me. I want to see them counted. Wes Callahan had been laid off on a Thursday, which he thought was a strange choice, because it left you a whole day to sit in the parking lot before the weekend gave you permission to feel it. 8 years he'd spent on the sheet metal line at the plant on the west side. He was good at it. That was not pride talking, it was just true in the way that a level is true. He could hear a bad rivet before the gauge found it. He could run his thumb along a wingskin and feel a stress line the way other men felt a change in the weather. His foreman used to walk him over to problems the way you walk a doctor over to a patient, and Wes would put his hands on the metal and stand there quiet for a while and then say, that's been flexing for a month. And he'd be right. None of that mattered when the contract went to a shop in another state. The letter used the word restructuring 4 times in 2 paragraphs, which Wes thought was a lot of times to say a word that didn't mean anything. He was 33 years old. He had a daughter named June who was 7 and who had lost her mother at 4 and who had recently started drawing families in groups of 3 with the third figure floating a little above the other 2, which her teacher had gently mentioned at conferences and which Wes had not slept well after hearing. He had 4 months of savings when the letter came. By the time he took the night custodial job at Keel Precision Works, he had 11 days. The job was not complicated. He came in at 10 at night. He emptied the bins, ran the floor scrubber down the main aisles, wiped the break room tables, cleaned the 2 sets of restrooms, and worked his way through the office wing before the sun came up. He was gone by 6:30. It paid a little more than half what the line had paid, and it had insurance after 90 days, and the 90 days was the whole reason he'd signed. June had a cracked molar and an eye appointment, and the kind of small ordinary needs that stop being small when there's no card in your wallet that will cover them. He didn't tell anyone at Keel about the 8 years. It wasn't shame, exactly. It was just that men who tell you what they used to be are usually asking you for something. And Wes had decided a long time ago that he'd rather be the man nobody had to manage. So for 3 weeks he pushed a scrubber past $4 million of computer-controlled machining centers and said good evening to the second shift guys on their way out, and did not touch anything that wasn't his to touch. Keel Precision Works made parts you have never thought about and have absolutely trusted with your life. Rigging hardware. Load pins. Shackles and turnbuckles and the wide flat plates that hold a crane's business and to the thing it is lifting. 41 years old as a company, founded by a man named August Keel, who had started with 2 lathes and a rented bay, and who was, by all accounts, the kind of man who would drive to a customer's site at midnight to look at a failed part with his own eyes. August Keel had been dead 19 months. His daughter ran the place now, and the way people said her name told you most of what you needed to know before you ever saw her. Rosalind Keel was 36, 22 months before Wes ever set foot in the building. She had been standing on the shop floor during a load test when a rigging assembly let go and dropped 4,000 pounds of test weight through the safety cage. She had been the only person inside the marked zone. She had been inside it because she had walked in to wave a young operator out of it, which was a detail that had not made it into most of the tellings. Incomplete spinal injury. 11 weeks in the hospital. Her father died of a heart attack 6 weeks into it, in the hallway outside her room, on his way in with a paper cup of coffee, and that was the part nobody ever said out loud in front of her. She came back to work in a chair, and she came back mean. That was the word the second shift guys used. Wes had heard it in the break room in the first week. She's mean now. She wasn't before. She's mean now, said the way men say things when they don't have a better word and don't want to look for one. He met her at 4 in the morning on his ninth night, which was not when either of them was supposed to be there. He'd come around the corner of the office wing with the mop bucket, and the lights were on in the corner office, and she was at the desk with 3 monitors going and her hair down, which he would later learn was the single most reliable sign that she had not gone home at all. She looked up. She looked at the bucket, then at him. "You're new." 3 weeks, Wes said. "You move the chairs in the conference room. They're easier to vacuum under. Put them back the way you found them." "I do put them back." "You put them back straight," she said. "They aren't straight. There's a cable run under the floor on the east side, and the table sets 9 inches off center to clear it. When you straighten the chairs to the table, they're crooked to the room. It looks like nobody in that room can see." Wes considered this. It was, he had to admit, correct. "I'll set them to the room," he said. "Thank you." That was all. She went back to her screens. He mopped the hallway. He did not think about it again until the next night, when he set the chairs to the room, and the night after that. He learned her by the leavings, the way you learn anyone whose floor you clean. 4 empty coffee cups and never any food. A blanket folded on the arm of a couch that had clearly been slept on. A prescription bottle that stayed full for 11 days and then disappeared. Printouts of the same accident report, 3 separate times, in the recycling. Each one with different lines underlined and none of them thrown out angry, folded, always folded, corners square, which told him more than the underlines did. And a photograph on the credenza behind her, turned to face the wall. He never touched it. He dusted around it for a month. The thing about the ramp was that it should not have been there at all. The main floor at Kiel had a proper accessible route through the front, but Rosalind did not use the front. She came in through the shipping bay at the east end, past the racks and the outbound staging, and up a short galvanized ramp onto the mezzanine that ran along the north wall. Because from the mezzanine you could see the whole floor at once. Her father had run the place from that mezzanine for 20 years. Everybody knew it. Nobody said it. The ramp had been put in for her. It was solid work. Wes had looked it over on his first week out of habit, the way he looked at everything, and found nothing to complain about. On the 23rd night, he came up the ramp at 4:10 and heard the tick. The chair was parked at the top, nose in, brake set, the way she left it on the night she stayed and moved to the office recliner. A spare chair, a lighter one. An older model that lived at the plant so she didn't have to load and unload the good one from the car. She left it there 4 or 5 nights a month. He'd rolled it 18 inches to get the mop head behind it. That was all. 18 inches and a tick. Wes crouched down and turned the front caster with 2 fingers. Tick. He turned it again, slower, and put his ear near it, and then he stopped breathing for a second, because the sound was not a stone, and it was not a bearing gone dry. He'd heard that sound in a hangar. That was the sound a fastener makes when it is turning in a hole it should not be able to turn in. He got the little flashlight off his belt. The caster fork was aluminum, hollow, with a steel axle bolt through the bottom. The bolt head sat in a recess. The recess had been widened. Not much. A 1/16, maybe less, and a crescent shape on the loaded side, with the bright silvery scoring you only get from a rotary tool with a small carbide burr, and the aluminum swarf still packed in the corner of the cut like sawdust in a windowsill. Somebody had thinned the wall of that fork from the inside where nobody would ever look, on the side that takes the load when the chair goes down a ramp. Wes sat back on his heels in the dark and felt his whole body go cold and steady, the way it used to go when he found a crack in a wing skin. He checked the other side. Same cut, mirrored, he checked the rear axles. Clean, he checked the brake linkage and found the pivot pin's cotter pin gone and the pin backed out 1/4 inch, sitting on nothing but friction and luck. That was the part that made his hands shake, and they didn't shake often. Because a caster fork failing on a flat floor is a fall. A caster fork failing on a ramp, with the brake letting go at the same moment, is a woman going head first off a galvanized edge onto a concrete floor with a steel rack 40 inches away. He stood up in the empty building at 4 in the morning and understood that he was holding a thing he could not put down. He could have gone to the shop supervisor. That would have been the correct chain. The shop supervisor came in at 6. He didn't know the shop supervisor. He didn't know anyone. He had been there 23 days and he was the man with the mop. And he was about to walk up to somebody and say the words, "I think somebody is trying to kill the owner." And the first thing that person would do, the very first thing, the thing any human being does, is look at the man saying it. He thought about June, asleep at his mother's, with her shoes lined up by the door because she liked them lined up. He thought about 90 days of insurance and 11 days of savings, and how those two numbers had never once been in the same room together. Then he took the multi-tool off his belt and did the only thing he could think of that was both careful and irreversible. He backed the axle bolts out of both front forks and put them in his shirt pocket. He carried the forks and the loose brake pin down to the shipping desk, found a marker in a shipping bag, wrote the date and the time and the words from our Keel chair, "Do not discard, W, Callahan" on the bag in block letters, and sealed it. Then he pushed the chair, rolling on its rear wheels and the two bare fork stubs, dragging an awful, off the ramp and into the middle of the main aisle where nobody could miss it. And he sat down on an empty pallet next to it, and he waited 2 hours and 50 minutes for Rosalind Keel to come in. She came in at 7 straight, in the good chair, with a coffee in the cup holder and her hair up. She stopped 40 feet away. She looked at the wrecked spare in the middle of her father's shop floor, and then at the man sitting on a pallet beside it in a gray custodial shirt with a shipping bag on his knees, and Wes watched her face do something complicated and fast, and then go absolutely flat. "What is this?" she said. "Somebody cut your chair," Wes said. The flat held. "Get up." He got up. "Do you know what you're saying?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you know what happens to a man who says it and is wrong?" "Yes, ma'am." She came the rest of the way. Up close, she was smaller than the building made her seem, and her eyes were the exact gray of the stock they cut turnbuckles from, and she did not look at the shipping bag. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that a lesser man would have filled it. Wes let it sit. "Show me," she said finally. He crouched, opened the bag on the concrete, and laid the two forks out on it side by side, with the light shining down the inside of the tube, and he did not say a word while she leaned over as far as her body would let her lean. He watched her see it. He watched her understand it, which took about 4 seconds, because whatever else she was, Rosalind Keel had grown up in a machine shop, and she knew a burr cut when it was 6 inches from her face. And then he watched her do the thing that he would think about every night, for the next month. She sat back. She looked at the ceiling of her father's building for a moment, and she said in a voice with nothing in it at all, "Put it back the way it was, throw the chair out, and never say this to anyone." Wes stood up slowly. "No," he said. "There are a lot of ways to say no to a powerful person. Most of them are really negotiations wearing a costume." Wes said it the plain way, the way you'd say it to a man asking you to hold a ladder you could see was broken. And then he stood there in the middle of the aisle and let it be true. Rosalind Keel did not raise her voice. He would learn that she never did. "You've been employed here 23 days. "Yes, ma'am." "You disassembled company property without authorization." "Yes, ma'am." "You are, at this moment, holding physical evidence of an alleged crime that you removed from a scene and put in a Ziploc bag with a marker. It's a shipping bag. That is not the part of the sentence you should be worried about." "No, ma'am." She breathed out through her nose. Behind her, at the far end of the floor, the first of the day shift was badging in. And Wes could hear the roll-up door on Bay 4 starting its climb, and he understood that the clock on this conversation had about 90 seconds left on it. "Why?" she said. "Because it wasn't where," Wes said. "Where is dull. Both of those cuts are bright, and they've got swarf still in them, which means it happened in the last day or two, and nobody ran that chair hard afterward. Somebody did it on purpose, recently, in this building. And they did the brake pin too, and a man who does the brake pin is not trying to embarrass you." Something moved behind her face. "Anyone can look up what a burr cut looks like," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Not many people can hear one." She tilted her head about a half inch. It was the first time he had ever seen her look at him instead of past him. What did you do before this? Sheet metal. 8 years. Where? West Side. The plant that closed in March. She was quiet a moment. Then, you'll come to my office at 9. Bring the bag. Don't set it down anywhere. Don't hand it to anyone. If a person asks you what it is, you tell them it's mine. Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Callahan, she was already turning. Understand that you have made your life significantly more difficult this morning. I know it, Wes said. He didn't tell her the rest, which was that he'd known it at 4 in the morning sitting on the pallet and had done the arithmetic twice, and had come out the same both times. He was not fired at 9. He was instead given a job that did not exist. The letter came from Human Resources on Monday, and it said that effective immediately, Wesley Callahan was reassigned from Environmental Services to a day shift position titled Facilities Liaison, reporting directly to the Chief Executive Officer at a wage increase of $1.10 an hour. He read it twice in the parking lot. There is no such thing as a facilities liaison. He knew that. She knew that. The job was a jar with a lid on it, and he was the thing inside the jar, and the reason she'd built it was so that he would be somewhere she could see him every single day instead of loose in the world with a shipping bag full of aluminum. He took it. The $1.10 was $440 a year, and there is a kind of poverty where $440 a year is not an abstraction, and Wes lived in it. That night, he moved the forks out of the shipping bag and into a blue tin. The tin had held coffee once, a long time ago, and then it had held Marisol's buttons. She'd been a mender. She'd taken in work from 3 dry cleaners and a bridal shop, and the tin had sat on the corner of the kitchen table for 6 years with 140 buttons in it that had no home. After she died, he had not been able to throw out the buttons, and he had not been able to look at them, so he had moved them into a jelly jar and put the jar in the cupboard. And the tin had gone empty on the shelf above the washer. Now it had 2 aluminum forks and a brake pin in it. June watched him do it from the doorway in her pajamas. 7 years old, hair still wet. What's that? Parts. From what? From a wheelchair, Wes said, because he had made himself a rule about lying to her. June came over and looked in the tin the way children look at things, with her whole face. Is the person okay? Yes. Are you going to fix it? Wes put the lid on the tin. I'm going to try. The first 6 weeks were a test, and both of them knew it. Rosalind Keel did not ask him to do anything unreasonable. That would have been simple. What she did was ask him to do reasonable things at a volume and a pace that would break most people, and then watch, with the patience of a woman who had watched 11 other people break, to see where the crack would start. She had him walk the entire facility with a clipboard and log every trip hazard, every non-compliant exit route, every extension cord run under a door. 400,000 square feet. She wanted it in 3 days. He did it in 3 days. She looked at the log for 6 minutes and said, "You've listed the East Dock ramp as compliant." It is. It has a 2-inch lip at the transition. It has a 2-inch lip because the concrete heaved. That's a repair, not a design defect. I listed it under settlement and cracking on page 4. Then it should be on both lists. It shouldn't be on both lists. Because if it's on both lists, the number at the top of page 1 goes up by 1, and it makes the ramps look worse than they are. And then somebody reads page 1 and doesn't read page 4. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took a pen and wrote something in the margin and did not tell him what it was. She had him sit in on a supplier call and take notes. Then she had him sit in on 12 of them. Then she had him summarize 11 months of quality escapes into a single page, which took him a weekend, and which she read in front of him without comment, and then sat down and said, "Do it again. This time tell me which ones are the same problem wearing a different hat." That one took him 4 days. When he brought it back, there were 3 problems on the page instead of 19. She read it. She set it down. "Where did you learn to do this?" "I didn't. Somebody did." "Nobody did," Wes said. "You just look at it long enough and stop wanting it to be complicated." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and was the closest thing to one he'd heard out of her. She was cruel in the small ways that are hard to prove. She would schedule him for 7 and be unreachable until 9. She corrected his phrasing in front of the plant manager. Twice she sent him across the city to pick up a document that could have been emailed, and he understood both times that this was a test of whether he'd say so, and both times he simply went. She never once mentioned the chair. Not once. Not in 6 weeks. The wrecked spare had gone into a locked cage in the tool crib on the first afternoon, and the story around the building was that it had been damaged in a forklift incident, which is the kind of story that is easy to start in a place where forklifts damage things weekly. And every morning at 7:10 she came up the east ramp in the good chair, and every morning Wes had already walked that ramp with a light before she got there. He did it on his own time, before he badged in, so it wasn't an argument. He thought she didn't know. She knew by the 4th day. She said nothing for 11 more. What cracked first was not her. It was the story he'd been told about her. He'd been given the mean version by the break room, and he had been carrying it around for weeks like a coat somebody handed him at a door. Then, in his 8th week, at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, a call came in from a crane operator in Enid, Oklahoma, whose company had bought a set of keel shackles 9 years ago and who had one that had gone oval on him and who was calling to complain. Wes was in the office when the call came through. He watched her take it herself. Not route it. Take it. Say the number on the body, she said. He said it. Say the letter after the number. He said that too. She closed her eyes for a second, and Wes watched her go somewhere in her own head, down a hallway of drawers. That's not oval from load, she said. That's oval from a side pull. Are you rigging off the bow or the pin? Silence on the line. You're rigging off the pin. More silence. Don't do that, she said, and there was nothing scolding in it at all. It was the flattest kindness Wes had ever heard. It's a common thing, and half the yards in this state do it. It's going to bend the pin before it tells you anything's wrong. Pull that one out of service today. Not tomorrow. I'll send you 2 replacements at no charge and a card that shows the 4 ways to rig it. And you put the card in the cab where your new guys can see it, because your new guys are going to do exactly what you did. She hung up. Wes said 9 years is way past any warranty. I know how long 9 years is. Then why? Because a man in Enid is going to be standing under that load next Tuesday, Rosalind said. And he doesn't know my warranty and he shouldn't have to. She went back to her screen. Wes sat there and let the coat slide off his shoulders and hit the floor. After that, he started noticing what he'd been trained not to notice. She knew names. All of them. Not just the plant manager and the schedulers. She knew that Reuben on second shift had a boy in the Navy, and she knew which ship. She knew that Hattie in shipping had gone back to school at 51, and she asked about the class, by name, in October in the hallway, without breaking stride. She kept her father's notebooks in the credenza, and she still ran load numbers by hand on paper first, before she'd trust the software. Because August Keel had told her once that a man who can't do it on paper doesn't know if the computer is lying to him. She stayed until 4 in the morning 4 nights a month, and slept on the couch and told everyone she'd come in early. And she went out of her way, every single day, in 100 small choreographed movements to make sure that no one in that building ever had to watch her struggle with anything. That was the thing he finally understood, standing in the doorway with a box of ledger paper. It wasn't pride. It was accounting. She had decided that every time somebody had to wait for her, or hold a door, or look away, she was spending something out of an account that was never getting refilled, and so she had built her entire life around never making a withdrawal. She had made herself the least expensive person in the room, and she was killing herself doing it. He never said any of that to her. He would have rather chewed glass. What he did instead was start making the withdrawals disappear. The heavy fire door between the office wing and the floor had a closer set too stiff. It took her 2 pushes, every time, and the second push was the ugly one. Wes took the closer apart on a Saturday, cleaned 40 years of grit out of it, adjusted the sweep, and put it back. It took him 90 minutes. He didn't mention it. The lip on the east ramp, The 2-inch heave. He ground the transition down and feathered it with self-leveling compound on a Sunday. On his own dime, $41 of material, and he never turned in a receipt. The break room microwave was on a shelf at 60 inches, which meant she never used the break room. He moved the microwave to the counter and moved the coffee supplies up to the shelf. And when the second shift lead complained, Wes said the shelf bracket was pulling out of the drywall and would have dropped the microwave on somebody's foot, which was not true, and which was the only lie he told at Keel Precision Works. She noticed all of it. Of course she did. She noticed everything. On a Wednesday in the 9th week, she rolled up to his desk. The desk was in an alcove that had been a copy room and set a paper coffee cup down on it. You didn't put in for the ramp material. No, ma'am. Put in for it. It was $41. Put in for it, Mr. Callahan, or I'll have to have a conversation with you about unauthorized modifications to the facility. And I don't want to have that conversation, because I'd have to win it. Wes looked at the coffee cup. What's this? That's coffee, she said, already leaving. It's a beverage. He put in for the $41. The hint came on a Tuesday in the 11th week, and it lasted about 2 seconds, and he would take it out and turn it over in his head 300 times before it ever meant anything. They were in the tool crib. She'd come down to sign off on a gauge calibration because the crib attendant was out, and she would not let a calibration sit. Wes had a coffee, his own, in a travel mug, hot enough to matter, and he set it on the edge of the bench, and the bench had a wobble in it that he had not gotten to yet, and the mug went over. Most of it hit the floor. A good splash of it went across the top of her right foot and the strap of her shoe, and her leg moved. Not much. It was not a step or a kick or anything a person would put in a report. It was a small, fast retraction. A flinch back and in, the exact thing your body does before your mind has been informed of anything at all, and it happened in the quarter second before her face changed. Wes was on his knees with his rag before he'd finished thinking about it. I'm sorry, hot. Is it? It's fine. It went right across your foot. It's fine, Rosalind said, and the room changed temperature. There's no sensation below the L1. Wiped the floor. He wiped the floor. He did not say, I watched your leg move. He did not say it because he was on his knees with a rag, and because saying it would have been handing her something enormous with nothing under it, and because he had been the man in the hospital hallway 3 years ago when a very kind nurse had said something hopeful that turned out to be nothing, and he still remembered the exact shape of the hour that came after. So he wiped the floor and put the mug in the sink and fixed the wobble in that bench the next morning with 2 shims and a socket wrench. But he put it in the tin. Not the thing itself, obviously, just the fact of it. He went home that night and wrote on a strip of masking tape, "Two's hot coffee. R foot it moved," and stuck it inside the lid of the blue tin above the 2 aluminum forks, and closed it, and stood there in his kitchen for a while in the dark. Because the tin was starting to be a place where he put things that nobody was ready to look at yet. June named it before he did. She was at the table with her homework when he came in from the second shift of a Saturday he'd volunteered for, and she looked up and said, "How's the lady?" "Which lady?" "The one whose parts are in the tin." Wes hung up his coat. "She's all right. She works too much." "Is she nice?" He thought about the shackle in Enid. "She's better than nice," he said. "She's fair." June considered this with tremendous seriousness, the way she considered everything. "That's not as good as nice," she said. "No," Wes agreed. It's harder, though, what he did not know that Saturday, with his kid at the kitchen table and $40 in his checking account and a blue tin on the shelf above the washer, was that 11 floors of a different kind of trouble had already started moving toward that building, and that the man driving it had spent the last 6 weeks in the corner office 3 doors down from Rosalind Keel's, being unfailingly kind to everyone, including her, and especially him. She tried to make him quit twice, that he knew of. The first time was the Tulsa meeting. She had a customer coming in, a big one, a rental fleet that bought load pins by the 100, and the afternoon before, She looked up from her desk and said, "You'll present the quality summary." Wes said, "I'm the facilities liaison. You wrote it. I wrote it for you. Then it should be easy for you to say it out loud." There were 9 people in that conference room. 2 of them were the fleet's engineers. One of them was Keel's own quality manager, a man named Dennis Roby, who had been at the company for 26 years and who had watched a custodian get promoted into a made-up job 6 weeks earlier and had opinions about it that he did not keep especially private. Wes stood up in a gray shirt with his name stitched on it and talked for 11 minutes about 3 problems wearing 19 hats. At minute 9, one of the fleet engineers interrupted and asked a question about heat lot traceability that Wes did not know the answer to. Wes said, "I don't know. The room did that small, terrible shift." "I don't know," he said again, "but I know who does. And I know where the record is. And if you'll give me until 5 o'clock, I'll have the actual answer instead of a good guess. Because a good guess is how you end up with a pin in the field that nobody can trace." He looked at Dennis Roby when he said it, because Roby did know, and because a man who has been somewhere 26 years would rather be asked than gone around. Roby answered it. Wes wrote it down. The meeting went on. Afterward in the hallway, Rosalind said, "You could have made something up." "Yes, ma'am. Half the men in that room would have." "Yes, ma'am. Why didn't you?" Wes shifted the binder to his other arm. "Because you build the thing that holds up the load," he said. "Seems like a bad place to start guessing." She didn't answer that. But the next morning there was a nameplate on his alcove desk, a real one engraved, and it had been ordered a week before the meeting, which meant she had ordered it before she knew he'd pass, and Wes stood there looking at it for longer than a nameplate deserves. The second time she tried to make him quit was uglier. She came in on a Thursday in a temper he'd never seen on her, from a doctor's appointment she hadn't put on the shared calendar, and she took it apart on him for 2 hours over things that were not his fault. The lighting audit was late, which it was, because she had pulled him off it. The supplier packet had a typo, which it did, on page 9 in a footnote. He'd parked in the visitor row, which he had, because the lot was iced, and the visitor row was the only row that had been salted, and he had salted it himself at 6 that morning. She said, "At the end of it, perhaps this isn't work you're suited for." Wes stood in the doorway of her office with his hands at his sides. "You want me to quit," he said. "I want the lighting audit. You want me to quit, and I've been trying to figure out why, and I think I've got it." He said it quietly. "It's because I'm the only person in this building who knows. And every morning you look at me and you have to know it again. And that's expensive, I get that. So you figure if I go, it goes." The office got very still. "It doesn't go," Wes said. "It just goes somewhere you can't see it. That's worse." Rosalind Keel looked at him with her father's gray eyes and said nothing for 11 seconds. Then she said, "The lighting audit." Friday. He had it on her desk Friday. She never tried again. The photograph turned itself around in the 11th week, and he almost missed it. He came in on a Monday and dusted the credenza and stopped, because the frame was facing out. It was a shop photo, 20 years old by the film grain, taken on the floor by the old horizontal mill. August Keel in the middle, big through the shoulders, arms crossed, looking like a man who had never once in his life wondered whether he was welcome somewhere. 2 shop hands on the left. And on the right, a girl of about 15 in safety glasses too big for her face, holding a part up to the camera with both hands, grinning like she'd invented it. Wes had never seen Rosalind Keel smile. He looked at that girl for a while. "That's a turnbuckle body," said her voice behind him, and he did not jump, because by then he'd learned the sound of her chair on carpet. "First one I ever set up and ran myself. I was 15. I made 40 of them and 38 passed." "That's good for 15. He told me it was mediocre for a Keel." She said it without any bitterness at all, which somehow made it land harder. Then he took the 2 rejects home and put them on the mantel. "He never told me he did that. I found them after he died." Wes put the duster down. "Why'd you turn it back around?" Rosalind looked at the photograph for a moment. "Because a man in my building said out loud that somebody wants me dead," she said. "And it turns out That makes a person want to look at her father. Then she rolled past him to her desk and said, "The Ochoa quote is $9 off, and it's your arithmetic." And the moment shut like a door, and Wes let it. Because he was learning her the way you learn weather. Grant Merrick came back from Houston on a Tuesday in the 12th week and shook Wes's hand in the parking lot before Wes even knew who he was. "You're Callahan." 52, gray at the temples, a canvas jacket instead of a suit, a handshake that lasted exactly the right length of time. "Grant, Chief Operating Officer, which mostly means I fly places so Roz doesn't have to." Nobody called her Roz. Wes had never heard anybody call her Roz. "Nice to meet you. I heard about the ramp." Merrick nodded toward the east dock. "The transition. You did that on a Sunday with your own money." "It's not a big thing." "It's a big thing," Merrick said, and he looked at Wes with an expression of such uncomplicated warmth that Wes felt something in his chest ease. "Do you know how many people in this building have done something for her that she didn't ask for? In 2 years?" Wes didn't answer. "2, Merrick said. "You and Hattie in shipping, and Hattie's been here since Reagan." He clapped Wes on the shoulder once, lightly, and started toward the door. "August hired me in 96. I carried that man's toolbox for 4 years before he let me touch a customer. I'd have laid down in traffic for him." He paused with his hand on the door. "I'd do it for her too, I want you to know that, since you're around her all day now. Whatever you need, you come to me. Any hour." He held the door. Wes went through it. And for 6 full weeks after that, Grant Merrick was the kindest man in the building, to Wes, to Rosalind, to everyone. And every single thing he did was true and helpful and generous, right up until the morning Wes found out what it was for. Here is what Wes had, 12 weeks in, written on the back of a facilities work order in pencil. The chair had been cut sometime between Friday afternoon and Monday night, because he had rolled it himself on the Friday to mop, and there'd been no tick. That was a 70-hour window. In 70 hours, a building that size sees maybe 400 badge swipes on a normal weekend, and this had not been a normal weekend, because the annual gauge calibration had run Saturday and Sunday, and the place had been full of contractors. The cuts were made with a rotary die grinder and a carbide burr about 1/8 of an inch across. The tool crib had 4 of those. 3 lived in the crib, and 1 lived in the maintenance cart. The crib logged everything. And the security cameras kept 30 days. He was on day 34 when he first thought to ask. That was the thing that would keep him up later. Not that he'd been slow, but that he'd been careful, and careful had cost him the only clean proof there was ever going to be. The system had rolled. The weekend was gone. Overwritten at 2 in the morning by a machine doing exactly what it had been told to do. So he had the crib log, and the crib log was a paper book in a 3-ring binder with a pen on a string, and Wes sat with it for 4 evenings. Saturday, 11:40 a.m. Die grinder, Unit 3. Signed out. Return 12:15. 35 minutes. The name in the column was hand-printed, and it was not a Keel employee. It was C. Bertram, and next to it, in the purpose column, in the same square hand, somebody had written, "Dressing a burr on cow fixture." Wes stood in the tool crib for a long time with his thumb on that line. He knew the name. Everybody at Keel knew the name. Cyrus Bertram ran a 2-man outfit out of a metal building on the north side and had done third-party inspection and certification work for Keel Precision for 19 years, and he had been the man in the truck at every load test Wes had ever heard anyone talk about, including the 120 2 months ago, especially the 120 2 months ago. Wes did not go to Rosalind with it. Not yet. He went to the records room instead and pulled the certification packet for the test rig that had failed, which was public inside the building because it had been part of the insurance file, and he read it 4 times. And there it was on page 11. And it was nothing, and it was everything. The rigging assembly that had let go had been built up from Keel's own hardware, except for one component. The master link, the big oval ring at the top that everything else hangs from, had not been Keel's. It had come in as a customer-supplied item on the test order with a certificate of conformance from a distributor, and it had been visually inspected and accepted on site by the third-party inspector, and the inspector had signed the line and dated it. C. Bertram, and the certificate of conformance behind it had a heat lot number on it. Wes copied that number onto the back of the work order in pencil, under everything else, and then he sat down on the floor of the records room between two file cabinets with his back against the wall, because his legs had gotten strange. Because he had spent 8 years in a plant where every load-bearing part had a stamp on it, and he knew what a heat lot number was supposed to look like. And he knew that a heat lot number is a chain. It walks you back from the part in your hand to the pour, to the mill, to the day. And he knew that the fastest way in the world to make a cheap counterfeit ring look like a certified one was to photocopy somebody else's chain onto it. He didn't know that's what had happened. He knew it was the first question anyone should have asked, and nobody had asked it in 22 months, because at the moment that assembly hit the floor there was already a much simpler story sitting right there, and her name was on the purchase order. The board packet came out on a Wednesday, and Grant Merrick brought it to Wes himself, which was the part Wes would think about later. "You should see this before she does," Merrick said. He'd shut the alcove door, which nobody ever did. He looked tired for the first time since Houston, not because I'm going around her, because she's going to be angry, and you're the one who's with her all day, and I'd rather you weren't blindsided. The packet was 40 pages. Wes only ever needed 6 of them. Slade Holdings, a fleet and industrial group out of Fort Worth, had made an offer for a controlling stake in Keel Precision Works. The packet recommended it. The recommendation ran through the usual language about capital access and market position, and then, on page 19, under a heading called Executive Continuity Considerations, there was a paragraph. It noted the CEO's medical status. It noted that she had missed 9 board or customer commitments in 22 months. It noted an insurance carrier's concern about the CEO's continued presence on the production floor during active load testing. It recommended a transition to a non-operational chairman role with a full seat and full economics, in a manner that honors the founder's legacy and the CEO's own long-term well-being. They were not going to fire her. That was the genius of it. They were going to be gentle with her, publicly in writing forever. Wes read page 19 3 times. "You wrote this," he said. "I did." "Why?" Merrick sat down on the edge of the desk. He didn't argue and he didn't posture. And that was the worst part. Because a liar Wes could have hated cleanly. "Because she's going to die in that building," he said. Wes didn't say anything. "You've been here 12 weeks. I've been here 29 years. I carried her on my shoulders at a company picnic when she was 8 years old." Merrick's voice didn't rise. "She sleeps on that couch. She's had 2 rounds of infection she never reported to anyone because she thinks a hospital day is a weakness. She took a call from Enid last month at 4 in the afternoon and stayed until midnight redrawing a card for a man she's never met. There is nobody left in her life. Her father is dead. Her mother's been gone since she was 12. Aaron left 8 months after the accident, and she has replaced every single one of them with this." He gestured at the wall, at the floor beyond it, at the 400,000 square feet. "And this doesn't love her back. So you're taking it." "I'm taking it off her," Merrick said, "because she will not put it down, and I have watched her carry it for 2 years, and I am not going to stand at another Keel funeral." He said it with real grief. That was the thing. It was not a performance. "There's another way to help somebody," Wes said. "Name it. Ask her." Merrick smiled a little. "Sadly, you've met her." "Yeah," Wes said. "I have. And I've noticed that everybody in this building loves her enough to decide things for her, and not one of you loves her enough to lose an argument with her." Merrick's face changed then, for about a half second, and Wes filed it and did not know yet what it was. "The vote's the 19th, Merrick said, standing. 3 weeks. She'll want the fight and she can't win it, and when she loses it in a room in front of 11 people, it's going to do something to her I don't think she comes back from. So if you have any pull with her at all, and I think you might, which is the only reason I'm in this room. Use it to get her to take the deal quietly. He put his hand on the door. I like you, Callahan, he said. I'd have hired you in a second. I want you to remember I said that. 3 weeks. The clock started that afternoon, and everything in that building began to move faster, and the first thing that moved was her. She read the packet in 11 minutes. Wes watched her do it. She did not throw it. She squared the pages, set it down, and said, "Get me the 52-week backlog and the last 4 quarters of scrap by machine." Now? Now. They worked until 1 in the morning, then until 2 the next night. She was building a case, and it was a good case. The backlog was up 19%. Scrap was down. The fleet contract they'd just won was worth more than Slade's whole premium over 5 years. And Wes typed and printed and ran numbers on paper first because she wouldn't trust the software. And somewhere in there, the two of them stopped being an executive and a facilities liaison and became two. People on the same side of a table with cold coffee. On the 8th night, she said, without looking up, "Why are you still here? It's 11:40. That is not what I asked you." Wes set down the pen. "June's at my mother's till Sunday," he said. "And you're going to sit here and do this whether I go home or not, so I'd rather be the one handing you the pages." She looked at him. "Nobody has ever done that," she said, and then, immediately, in the voice she used to close doors, "Pull the Ochoa tonnage by month." He pulled the Ochoa tonnage by month. But something had shifted, and 4 nights later, at 2 in the morning, with the whole building dark except one office, she told him the truth. It came out flat. That was what he remembered. No tears in it, no build, no pause for effect. She talked the way a person reads a serial number off the bottom of a part. She said that in the spring 3 years ago the board had put a cost target on her. 9% out of consumables and purchased components inside 2 quarters, and she had gotten 7 of it clean. Out of freight and packaging and 2 suppliers who had been overcharging them since her father stopped watching. The last 2% was in hardware. She had a distributor come in with a line of master links and shackles at 19% under, with certificates, with a mill test report, with everything, and she had walked it past 3 people who all said the paper was in order. She had signed the purchase order on a Tuesday in April. Her signature, her initials on the change, her name in the system. She said 14 months later, they built up a test rig for a customer witness test and used a master link from that line, and Cy Bertram put his eyes on it and signed for it, and she stood in the cage watching a young operator named Dario back into the marked zone without seeing it. And she went in to wave him out. She said the ring opened at 61% of rated load. She said her father came to the hospital every day for 6 weeks and never once said anything about the purchase order, and she had waited for him to say it, and he never did. And then he died in the hallway with a paper cup of coffee, and she had spent 19 months being absolutely certain that the not sane had killed him. She said she had pulled the accident file 4 times and had never gotten past page 11. She said, in the same voice, that she had understood on the morning Wes laid the 2 cut forks out on a shipping bag on her concrete floor exactly what she was looking at. And that her first thought, her actual first thought, the true one, the one before the manners got there, had not been fear. It had been. That's fair. Then she stopped. The building made its 2 in the morning noises. A compressor cycled somewhere far off. Wes did not tell her it wasn't her fault. He wanted to. He had the sentence loaded and he could feel the shape of it in his mouth, and he understood, with the clarity you sometimes get at 2 in the morning, that if he said it, he would be doing to her exactly what Grant Merrick was doing to her in a 40-page packet, deciding on her behalf what was true, because it was easier than sitting in the room with what she'd just said. So instead, he reached into his bag and took out the folded work order and smoothed it on the desk and turned it toward her. "That's the crib log for the weekend the chair was cut," he said. "Lines 4th from the bottom, and that number at the bottom in pencil is the heat lot off the certificate of conformance for the ring that opened. Page 11. She did not touch the paper. "You went into the accident file." "Yes, ma'am. I told you to leave the chair alone." "You did. And you went into my father's accident file." Yes, ma'am. Rosalind Keel looked at the pencil marks for a long, long time. Wes watched her jaw. He watched her hands, flat on the desk on either side of the paper, the way you hold onto a table in weather. Say it, she said. The man who signed off on the ring that broke your back, Wes said, signed a die grinder out of your tool crib for 35 minutes on the Saturday your chair got cut. And you'd pulled that file 4 times, and files leave a trail, and there's a records request log with your name on it that anybody in this building can see. That's a coincidence. It might be. It's a coincidence, Mr. Callahan, and the other thing you're implying is that the paperwork on that ring was bad, and I signed for it. So if the paperwork on that ring was bad, then you didn't do it, Wes said. Then somebody sold you a lie with a certificate stapled to it, and the man whose whole job was to catch that lie put his eyes on it and signed his name, and he has spent 22 months watching you carry it for him. Silence. That's what I've been implying, Wes said. For 4 weeks. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. She put her hand over the pencil number. Flat. Covering it. Get out, she said quietly. Go home. It's 2 a.m. He got his coat. At the door she said his name, and he stopped. If you're wrong about this, Rosalind said, you don't just lose your job. He'll take everything you have, and you have a daughter. I know it. Then why? Wes stood in the dark doorway of the copy room that used to be a copy room. Because on my 9th night you told me the chairs were crooked to the room, he said. And you were right, and nobody in that building had noticed in 9 years. And I've been trying to figure out ever since what it costs a person to see everything the way you see it, and get told for 22 months that the one thing you saw wrong was the thing that broke you. He put his hand on the frame. You're not wrong about much, Miss Keel, he said. I don't think you're wrong about this either. I think you never looked. Then he drove home and sat in the truck in his own driveway for 20 minutes, and inside the house his mother had left the porch light on, and June had left her shoes lined up by the door. They took his badge on a Friday. It was the 88th day. He knew the number because he had known the number every morning for 3 months, the way you know how many cans are left. 90 days to insurance. June's eye appointment was on the 94th. He came in at 7, and his badge didn't open the east door. He stood there and swiped it 3 times, and then walked around to the front, and the front desk had a printed sheet with his name on it. And Dennis Roby from Quality was standing in the lobby with his arms crossed and would not look at him. The human resources director was a decent woman named Priya Rahman, who had been at Keel 11 years, and she said the words like they hurt her. Unauthorized removal of company property from a secured area. Unauthorized modification of facility infrastructure. Unauthorized access to confidential incident records outside the scope of his role. All 3 of them true. Every single one. The tool crib cage was opened Wednesday night, she said. The damaged chair that was being held in it is gone, Wes. Somebody took it out of the building. It wasn't me. Your name is the only name on the hold tag. Because I wrote the hold tag. I know, Priya said. I know. That's the problem. He asked for Rosalind. Rosalind was in Fort Worth with 2 board members and would not be back until Monday, which was a thing that had been on the calendar for 3 weeks and was therefore not suspicious and was, in the way these things go, exactly convenient enough. He asked who'd signed the termination. Priya turned the sheet around. The signature was Grant Merrick's, and under it, in the line for reason in a square familiar hand, somebody had written protecting the company and the CEO. They walked him out through the shipping bay, past the ramp he'd ground flat with his own $41, and the day shift watched him go the way people watch. And Hattie from shipping came out from behind her desk and hugged him, which was the only thing that nearly broke him. He sat in the truck in the parking lot for a while. Then he drove to the north side and sat across the street from a metal building with a sign that said Bertram Testing and Inspection for 20 minutes, and did not get out, because he had 88 days of employment, no badge, no standing, no evidence, and a 7-year-old at home. Then he drove to his mother's house and picked up his daughter and took her for a milkshake, and she talked the whole way about a boy in her class who could dislocate his thumb on purpose. And Wes laughed in all the right places and did not tell her anything. And that night, after she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the blue tin in front of him and did not open it. Nothing in it was worth anything now. 2 aluminum forks that a fired man had removed from company property without permission. In a tin, in a rented house on the west side. A brake pin. A strip of masking tape with 4 words on it. He was a custodian who'd gotten above himself and made an accusation about a 19-year vendor with no camera footage and no chain of custody and no job. And every version of this that he could see from the kitchen table ended with him explaining it to a lawyer he could not afford. At 11 o'clock, he got up and put the tin back on the shelf above the washer. At 11:40, headlights came up the driveway and stayed on. He looked out through the kitchen curtain and saw a car he didn't know. And then the passenger door opened and the dome light came on, and he saw the frame of the good chair come out of the trunk in pieces because somebody who wasn't used to doing it was doing it in the dark, and Wes was out the door in his socks. Rosalind Keel had driven herself back from Fort Worth. 4 hours and 20 minutes. She had never been to his house. She had gotten the address off a payroll record, which she said immediately was a violation of about 4 policies, and then she sat there in her own chair in the middle of his cracked driveway in November, with her breath showing, and said, "I read page 11. The house was 940 square feet and had a step at the front door. Wes carried her up it. He asked first, he stood there in his socks in the cold and said, "There's a step. It's 4 inches. I can go get a piece of ply or I can carry you, and I'd rather you tell me which." And Rosalind looked at him for a second and said, "The plywood is in the garage of a man who's been fired. Carry me." He carried her. It took 9 seconds. Neither of them said anything about it, then or ever. She sat in her chair at his kitchen table under a light with a dish towel draped over the shade because the bulb was too bright, and she put a folder on the table, and she said page 11 again like it was a place. "The certificate of conformance behind that master link lists a heat lot," she said. "You wrote it on the back of a work order in pencil. I ran it Thursday night. Ran it how? I pulled every certificate of conformance from that distributor that we have on file. 3 years, 406 documents." She opened the folder. 291 of them carry that same heat lot number. Wes sat down slowly. "That's not possible." "No," Rosalind said. "It is not. A heat is 1 pour. A big one is 40 tons. You cannot make 406 shipments of forged hardware across 3 years out of 1 heat, and you certainly cannot do it while the certificates show 11 different production dates." She turned a page toward him. "It's 1 document photocopied for 3 years. They bought a real certificate once and married it to whatever they had in the yard. Then the ring that broke was never certified anything," she said. "It was a ring. They sat with that." 22 months, Wes said. 22 months. Nobody ran the number. Nobody ran the number, she agreed, because the number is the last thing you check, and there was already a signature on the purchase order in the first place anybody looked. Her hands were flat on the table. "Mine," she said. That was when June came out. She came down the hall in her pajamas with her hair sideways off the pillow and stopped in the kitchen doorway, and Wes said, Hey, Bug, it's late." June did not look at her father at all. She looked at the woman at the table with the tremendous, unembarrassed attention of a 7-year-old and said, "Are you the lady from the tin?" The kitchen went very quiet. "June," Wes said. "What tin?" said Rosalind. June padded straight across the linoleum in her bare feet, went to the shelf above the washer, stood on her toes, and got it down with both hands, because it was heavier than it looked. She put it on the table in front of Rosalind and took the lid off. 2 aluminum forks. A brake pen. A strip of masking tape stuck inside the lid. "He puts things in here he's not ready to look at," June said. "It used to have my mom's buttons." Wes said, "June, that's what you said." June looked at him, mildly, entirely unbothered. "You said that's where they go till you're ready." Rosalind Keel looked into a coffee tin on a scratched kitchen table in a rented house on the west side of Wichita. And Wes watched a thing come apart in her face that he had been watching hold for 12 weeks. May I? She said. June nodded. She lifted out one of the forks and turned it in the light and looked down the inside of the tube. Then she put it back, carefully, the way you put back something breakable. June leaned on the table with both elbows. Does it hurt? June, that's not, it's all right, Rosalind said. Then, to June, plainly, some days. Not the way you're thinking. My back hurts. My legs don't feel much of anything. Do you get sad about it? Yes. Do you tell anybody? No. June frowned, as though someone had told her that 2 plus 2 was going to be 7 from now on. That's dumb, she said. June, it is dumb. She turned on her father with the fury of the seriously honest. You do it too. You say you're fine at the table and then you sit in the truck. I can see the truck from my window, Dad. I can see it from my window. Nobody said anything. My mom died, June said to Rosalind, in the same tone she'd used about the boy who could dislocate his thumb, because that is how children carry the enormous things. Right out in the open, in both hands, like a turnbuckle body they made themselves. And everybody said I was so brave. And I wasn't brave, I was just little. Being little isn't brave. And Dad says you can't fix a thing while you're standing there pretending it isn't broken. She looked at the tin. That's a broken thing, she said. It's right there. So somebody should fix it. Then she yawned, hugely, and said, Can I have juice? And the whole thing was over. The way it is with children. The wall came down in 11 sentences, and the child who did it wanted juice. Wes got her juice. He carried her back to bed at midnight. When he came out, Rosalind Keel was sitting exactly where he'd left her, with her hand flat on the lid of a coffee tin, and her face was wet. And she made no attempt at all to do anything about it, which he understood was the single most expensive thing she had ever done in front of another person. He sat down. He didn't touch her. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, There's a way to do this. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. The vote is in 17 days. I know. We have no chain of custody on the chair. We can't prove who cut it. The footage is gone, and my chief operating officer walked you out of my building on a Friday because a man he's trusted for 19 years told him you staged it. Bertram told him that? Bertram told him, Rosalind said, that you'd been asking questions in the crib for a month, that you'd invented yourself a job out of a mop, and that this was how it starts. She looked up. And Grant believed it, Wes, and I need you to understand why he believed it, because if you don't understand it, you'll fight the wrong man for the next 17 days. Why did he believe it? Because he loves me, and he is terrified, she said, and terrified people take the story that lets them act. Wes turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. Then we don't fight him, he said, and we don't chase the man who cut the chair. Because if we chase him, we're two people with a tin, and he's got 19 years and a business license. Then what? We chase the number. He pulled the folder over. 291 certificates, he said. That's not one bad ring. That's every single part that came in on that paper for 3 years. Where did they go? Rosalind stopped moving. Out the door, she said slowly. Into assemblies. Into the field. Into cranes, Wes said. And how many states? She was already doing it in her head, and he watched her father's daughter come all the way up out of the water for the first time since he'd met her. We have to notify, she said. Yes, ma'am. Voluntarily, before anyone makes us. 291 certificates against a customer list. That's a recall on hardware we didn't manufacture but did handle, and it will cost us a number I can't estimate at 1 a.m, and it will put in writing, publicly, over my signature, that Keel Precision Works accepted counterfeit certification for 3 years. Yes, 17 days before a board vote on whether I'm fit to run the company. Yes, they'll say I'm doing it to save myself. Some of them will. She looked at him. It's also, Wes said, the only version where the next man standing under a load doesn't find out the hard way. And you already know that, because you called a man in Enid 9 years out of warranty and sent him a card for his cab. Rosalind Keel sat in a kitchen with a dish towel on the lampshade for a long moment. I'll need a system, she said. Not a letter. A letter is an apology. I need a system. Because the board is not going to be moved by a woman apologizing, and Slade is not going to be moved by a woman apologizing, and frankly, neither would my father. What kind of system? She reached over and picked up the aluminum fork again and held it up between two fingers, and for the first time in 12 weeks, Wes saw her smile. A small, dangerous, entirely uncharitable smile that made her look exactly like the 15-year-old in the photograph. The kind, she said, where every load-bearing thing that leaves my building can be walked backward to the poor by anybody holding it. Stamped in the steel, not on the paper. Paper can be photocopied. Steel can't. Steel can't. She set the fork down on the table between them. Can you build that in 17 days? Wes looked at it. No, he said. I can build enough of it in 17 days that 11 people in a room can hold it in their hands. They named it on the fourth night, at that same table, and June named it, which by then surprised nobody. Rosalind had been trying words out loud: traceability initiative, chain of custody program, source verification, and June, who was doing multiplication with her tongue out, said without looking up, why don't you just call it the true line? True line, Wes wrote it on the back of the same work order, under the pencil. 17 days is not enough time to change a company. It is exactly enough time to prove that a company could be changed, which, if you have the right 11 people in the room, is the same thing. They worked out of a rented bay on South Hydraulic, because Wes could not badge into Keel, and Rosalind would not ask him to try. It was 400 square feet with a roll-up door, a bench, and a space heater that tripped the breaker if you ran it with the lights. She paid the $400 for the month out of her own account. He knew that because he saw the receipt, and because she left it face up on the bench where he'd find it, which he came to understand was how she said things. She put him on a contract the same day. $3,000 drawn against her own money, not the company's, for the design and demonstration of a source verification system. He almost didn't take it. It's not charity, she said, before he'd finished the first syllable. It's a rate. It's a low rate, actually, and if you knew what consultants charge, you'd be insulted. I need this built by a man who has spent 8 years looking at load paths, and you're the only one I've got, and I am not going to have you doing it for free so that on the 19th somebody can say I was buying a witness. Wes signed it. He bought June's eye appointment out of the first payment and got her glasses, small gold ones, and she wore them the way you'd wear a crown. The insurance was a harder conversation, and they had it on day 3, in the bay, at 7 in the morning. You were terminated on the 88th day, Rosalind said. I know what day it was. 2 days. I know. I can reverse it. She had a folder open on her knees. The termination was signed by an officer without cause documentation, and the policy requires my countersignature for a direct report. It isn't even close. I can have Priya void it this morning, backdate your reinstatement to the 4th, and you'd cross 90 on Tuesday. Wes sat down on the bench. And then Grant finds out inside a day, he said, and the story becomes that the CEO reinstated the man who accused a vendor 2 weeks before the vote. Yes, and every number I put in front of that board is a number bought and paid for. Yes, she said again, and then, with an edge, say the rest of it. There's no rest of it. There is, because you've done the arithmetic, and I've watched you do it 3 times this week. She shut the folder. Say it out loud, Wes, because I am not going to sit here and let you be quietly noble at your daughter. Wes turned the rag over in his hands. Her mother had a headache on a Tuesday, he said. That's it. That's the whole story. She had a headache on a Tuesday and she took something for it and she went to work. And by Thursday she was gone. And there was a bill afterward that I paid on for 2 years. And I have never once since then been in a room where somebody talked about insurance and heard it as paperwork. The bay was quiet except for the space heater. So yes, he said. I've done the arithmetic. And it comes out the same every time, which is that if June breaks an arm in the next 11 weeks, I will figure it out. And if I take a reinstatement in the middle of this, The 11 people in that room get handed a reason not to look at the 291 certificates, and they will take it. People always take the reason not to look. That's the whole thing we're fighting. Rosalind Keel looked at him for a long moment. After the 19th, she said, win or lose, the first business day, after the 19th. And I want that in writing, and I want it dated today, so that when it happens, nobody gets to say I bought you with it. She wrote it on a sheet of bay paper and signed it and made him sign it and put it in her bag. And neither of them mentioned it again until the day it mattered. June came on Sundays. That had not been anybody's plan. It happened because Wes's mother had a standing thing at church on Sunday mornings, and because a rented bay with a roll-up door is, to a 7-year-old, approximately the best place on earth, and by the second Sunday June had a milk crate to stand on and a job. Her job was to read the codes. Wes would stamp a piece, Reuben would hand it up, and June would read the 8 characters out loud, while Dennis Roby checked them against the screen. And she did it in the loud, flat voice of a person announcing a train. And she caught 2 errors in 3 weeks that 4 grown men had missed. She also, within about 11 minutes of the first Sunday, appointed herself to Rosalind. Not in a helping way. That would have ended it immediately, and Wes had been braced for it and had a speech ready that he never had to give. June simply parked her crate next to the chair and conducted her business from there. Your arms are stronger than my dad's. Yes, is that from the chair? That's from the chair. Can I try it? June, Wes said. She can try it, Rosalind said, and got herself onto the bench with the transfer board and let a 7-year-old wheel herself in slow, crooked circles around 400 square feet for 11 minutes, hollering, and then said, you're pushing with your hands. You'll blister. Push from the shoulder and let go at the bottom of the stroke. And June did it, and got it, and went faster. And on the 4th Sunday, out of nowhere, with her tongue out, coloring in the margins of a shipping manifest, do you have anybody? June, it's a question, Dad. Rosalind put down her pen. I have about 400 employees, she said, and a company, and a woman named B, who makes me do 11 steps twice a day and does not care at all that I don't want to. That's not anybody, June said. That's a job and a lady who's mean to you. June, it's all right. Rosalind was looking at the child with something Wes could not name. No, she said. I don't have anybody. June nodded slowly, absorbing this the way she absorbed everything, and went back to her coloring, and about 40 seconds later, without looking up, said, you could have us. Nobody said anything at all. I'm just saying it, June said. Because nobody says stuff and then everybody sits in the truck. Wes went and got a part off the bench that did not need getting. Here is what Trueline actually was, in the end. And it was so simple that Dennis Roby said a bad word out loud the first time he understood it. Every load-bearing part that came through Keel's door, theirs or a customer's, got a mark. Not a sticker, not a tag, not a line in a database. A laser stamp, right into the steel, in a spot that didn't touch the load path, an 8-character code. First 3, the heat lot as reported. Next 2, the year received. Next 3, a sequence. And the sequence was the whole trick. Because the sequence was assigned by weight. You could not stamp 406 shipments out of one 40-ton heat. Because the system knew what 40 tons was. When the 291st certificate came in claiming the same pour, the system would have refused the stamp, and the refusal would have printed a slip. And the slip would have gone in a tray on a shop desk where a human being would have looked at it and said, that can't be right. 22 months ago, that slip would have printed on a Tuesday in April. Wes built it on a laptop and a borrowed fiber laser marker and a spreadsheet, and it was ugly, and it worked. And by the 11th day, he could hand you a shackle, and you could type 8 characters into a phone and watch it walk backward to a mill in Alabama and a date. Dennis Roby came on day 6. He came on his own time, after his shift, and stood in the roll-up door with his arms crossed and said, I want to say something first. And Wes said, say it. And Roby said, I thought you were a climber. I know. 26 years I've been at that company. Nobody in 26 years asked me a question in front of a customer instead of going around me. You did it in your 8th week and I still decided you were a climber. Because I've been going around a long time and I liked being the one who knew things. He looked at the floor. That's all. That's the whole thing I wanted to say. He worked 22 hours that first weekend and did not take a dollar. Hattie from shipping brought the customer list. Reuben from second shift, whose boy was on a destroyer somewhere Wes could not pronounce, ran the 3-year outbound and matched 291 certificates against 448 assemblies and 81 customers in 11 states. And he did it at his own kitchen table because he would not do it on a keel machine, and Wes never asked him to do it that way. By day 14, they had it. 81 letters. 62 of the assemblies were still in service. 9 of them were rigged on cranes that were, at that moment, hanging things over people. Rosalind signed the first letter on the 15th day at 4 in the afternoon, at a bench in a rented bay, with a space heater off so the lights would stay on. It said Keel Precision Works had accepted certification it could not verify. It said the CEO had signed the purchase order. It said the customer should remove the listed items from service immediately, at Keel's cost. And it gave a phone number that rang on her desk. She wrote her own name at the bottom, and the way she did it, no flourish, small, level, Wes had to look away for a second. That's the end of me, she said, capping the pen. Maybe there's no maybe in it. 62 field removals and a public admission 15 days before an acquisition vote. Slade will cut the price. The board will say I did it to make myself unfireable. Half of them will be right. She set the pen down. And every single one of those men is going to be alive on Tuesday. She looked at the stack. Send them, she said. Cyrus Bertram came to the bay on the 17th night. He came in a truck with his company's name on the door, and he stood in the roll-up with the rain behind him, 61 years old, in a canvas coat, and he did not look like a man in a story. He looked like a man who had not slept, which is what most of them look like. You sent letters, he said. We did, said Rosalind. 81 of them. 81. You know what that does to me. His voice wasn't angry. It was almost curious, the way people get when the thing they've been dreading finally shows up and turns out to have a shape. 19 years I signed for you. 19 years. And I never once had a part come back on me. And I put my eyes on 10,000 pieces of that man's hardware and I loved it. And he stopped. Wes stood very still by the bench, and the 2 aluminum forks were in the blue tin 9 feet away on that bench, and he did not so much as glance at them. I didn't look at it, Bertram said. Silence the link. In April, the one on the test rig. I had 4 sites that day, and the paper was in order, and I'd signed 100 of those, and I didn't put a glass on it. I looked at the certificate, and I signed the line. He was still standing in the rain, and then it came apart, and it was on your purchase order, and everybody had a reason it was that, and you let it be that, Rosalind said. I let it be that. She looked at him from her chair for a long moment. For 22 months. Yes, you came to the funeral, she said. You stood in the receiving line at my father's funeral and you took my hand. Bertram's face came apart. I know what I did, he said. Wes said, quietly, in the chair? The old man looked at him, and Wes watched something happen that he had not expected, which was that Cyrus Bertram looked genuinely entirely lost. What about the chair? Somebody cut the front forks on her spare chair. In your building, on the calibration weekend. You signed a die grinder out of the crib for 35 minutes that Saturday. I dressed a burr on the cow fixture, Bertram said. The stand was chewed up from the last outfit. That's what I wrote in the book because that's what I did. He said it plainly, with no defense in it at all, and Wes felt the floor of his own certainty move. Then who cut it? Rosalind said. Bertram looked at her. Then he said, and it was the last thing he said that night, you want to ask the man who took it out of the cage. They were quiet after his truck pulled out. Rosalind said, I don't believe he did it. No, Wes said. Neither do I. Then someone did. Yeah, she rubbed her eyes with her thumb and forefinger. The vote's in 11 hours, she said. I have no idea what I'm walking into. Wes wiped his hands on a rag. I'll be in the parking lot, he said. You'll be in the room. I'm not an employee, Miss Keel. You're a contractor with a signed statement of work and you built the thing I'm presenting, she said. And you'll be in the room. And Wes, she stopped. It was the first time she had ever used his first name and they both heard it land. It's Roz. To exactly two people alive. And one of them just drove away in a truck. He looked at her across 400 square feet. Roz, he said. They didn't do anything about it. There was no moment, no music, nothing you could put in a report. He crossed the bay and crouched down beside her chair and put his hand over the top of hers on the armrest, and they stayed like that for a while, with the rain coming down on a metal roof on South Hydraulic. 2 people at the end of 17 days. And that was all. And it was plenty. At 10:40, driving her back to the hotel she'd been staying at since she'd stopped sleeping on the couch, she said, out of nowhere, June asked me something on Sunday. June had been at the Bay every Sunday. She had a job. She read the 8 character codes off the shackles out loud so the men could check them. And she was better at it than any of them. And she had a clipboard. What'd she ask? She asked if they get to keep me. Wes kept his eyes on the road. What'd you tell her? There was a long pause. The wipers went twice. I told her that wasn't mine to answer, Rosalind said, and she told me that was a cop-out. Wes laughed, a real one, surprised out of him. She's not wrong. No, Roz said, looking out the window at the wet lights of a city she had run a company in for 11 years without ever really looking at it. She's not wrong. He didn't sleep. He sat up at the kitchen table until 2 with the visitor log Hattie had pulled for him, not the crib book, the front desk book, the one nobody thinks about, the one with the little adhesive badges. And he read the calibration Saturday line by line by line. Bertram C. in 715. Out 440. 2 texts from the calibration house. A pest control route. And at 11:05 in the morning, in the guest column, in blue ink, Tanner, R, Meridian Fastener and Supply, courtesy call, no apt. Out at 12:40. Wes sat back in his chair. Royce Tanner had sold Keel Precision Works 406 certificates of conformance over 3 years. Royce Tanner had taken Rosalind Keel to lunch 11 days before she signed the purchase order. Royce Tanner still called on the plant twice a quarter with a box of donuts. And Royce Tanner had a records request log with her name on it, 4 times available to anyone who wandered past a shop desk. And Royce Tanner had spent that Saturday morning in a building where a die grinder was sitting out on a calibration fixture stand at the far end of the floor while the man who signed it out was in. The office wing having coffee. 35 minutes on a book. 95 on a badge. Wes looked at that page for a long time, and what he felt was not triumph. What he felt was the particular sickness of understanding that a man had done arithmetic, real arithmetic, at a kitchen table somewhere, the same as this one, and had come out the other side of it deciding that a woman going headfirst off a galvanized ramp was a cheaper outcome than a woman reading page 11. He put the log in the blue tin on top of the forks and put the lid on. The board met on the 19th at 9 in the morning in the room on the second floor with a long table that sat 9 inches off center to clear the cable run. 11 people. 6 directors on Keel's side, 2 from Slade Holdings with a lawyer, Priya from Human Resources taking the minutes, and Grant Merrick at the far end in a suit, who had not looked at Wes once since the door opened. Wes sat against the wall with a plastic toad at his feet. Rosalind Keel gave them 40 minutes. She did not defend herself for a single second of it. That was the thing Wes would carry. She opened with the letters, all 81 cents, the field removals already underway, 29 of 62 recovered by the previous afternoon at company cost, and she put the number on the screen. The real one, $410,000 against this fiscal year, and she said it flatly and did not soften it. Then she said, I signed the purchase order that brought that hardware into this building. I want that in the minutes, in exactly those words. Then she talked about Truling. She passed a shackle down the table, a real one, stamped, warm from the bay on South Hydraulic. She told them to take out their phones and type the 8 characters in, and 11 people bent their heads over a piece of hardware like a congregation, and a man from Slade Holdings said, out loud to nobody, "It goes all the way back to the mill. It goes to the poor," Rosalind said. In April of that year, this system would have printed a slip that said the paperwork in front of us was arithmetically impossible. It would have cost us $400 to look at that slip. It cost us this instead. She did not point at herself. She let the sentence end where it ended. "I am not asking this board to keep me," she said. "I'm asking it to keep this. Whoever runs this company in 90 days runs it with Trueline on the floor. Because the next man standing under one of our assemblies has no idea who any of us are, and he shouldn't have to." Then she stopped talking, and the room was quiet, and Grant Merrick put both hands on the table. "I'd like to speak to the continuity item," he said. "Go ahead, Grant." He looked down at his own page for a moment. Then he closed the folder. "I'd like to withdraw it," he said. Somebody at the Slade end said, "Grant, I'd like to withdraw it." Merrick said again, "And I'd like the minutes to show that I wrote it, that nobody put me up to it, and that I was wrong on the merits and wrong on the manner." He turned in his chair and looked at Rosalind for the first time. "I decided what was best for you without asking you, and I did it in a 40-page document, and I told myself it was mercy. Your father would have thrown me out of this building on my ear, and he'd have been right, and I've known that for 11 days. He reached down beside his chair and lifted a paper sack onto the table. "2 other things for the minutes," he said. "I removed the damaged chair from the tool crib on the 4th. I did it because I'd been told the custodian staged it, and I believed it, and I wanted it out of the building before it became a lawsuit." He set the sack down. "So I sent it to an independent lab in Oklahoma City on my own money and had them look at the front forks. Because if a man's going to be walked out of a building, I wanted to be able to sleep." He slid the envelope down the long table. Both cuts were made with a 1/8 carbide burr from the inside on the loaded side, consistent with a die grinder. Not consistent with wear, impact, or forklift contact. He kept his hand on it a second longer. The report stated the 11th. "I've been carrying it around for 8 days trying to find a way to say this that made me look better. There isn't one." He let go of the envelope. Wes stood up and put the visitor log on the table beside it and turned it around so it faced the room. Nobody in that room said anything for a while. The vote on the Slade transaction failed 7-4. There was no applause. That is not what happens in those rooms. There was a motion, and a second, and a count, and Priya Raman wrote it down, and the 2 men from Fort Worth shook hands with everyone on their way out, because that is also what happens in those rooms. Royce Tanner was arrested the following spring, on the federal charges, and Rosalind did not go to any of it. That is all that needs to be said about him. The room emptied at 11. Wes stayed to stack the chairs, which was not his job anymore, and which he did anyway. And when he'd finished, he found her out on the mezzanine at the rail, looking down at the floor her father had run for 20 years, with the whole shop going underneath her, the horizontal mill, Bay 4's roll-up climbing. Reuben walking a pallet jack across the aisle with his coffee. He came and stood beside her. $410,000, she said. "Yeah, and I kept my job by giving away the only thing that was keeping me safe." "Yeah." She was quiet a moment. "I want to show you something," she said, "and I want you to not say anything. Because if you say something, I'll stop." "All right." She put her hands on the rail. Then she moved the footplates out of the way, one and then the other, and set both feet flat on the mezzanine deck, and Wes stood absolutely still with his hands at his sides and did not offer. She pushed up on the rail. She came up out of that chair like something being drawn up out of deep water, shaking, her arms doing most of it and her legs doing some of it. Some of it, not none of it. And it was the sum that made the hair stand up on Wes's arms. And she straightened until her back was against nothing, and she was standing at her father's rail, over her father's floor, with her hands white on the steel. Below them, Dennis Roby looked up from the mill and stopped moving. 11 seconds. Then she sat down, hard, and put both hands over her face, and breathed. Wes crouched next to the chair. He did not touch her. "Since when?" he said. August, she said, into her hands. Since the coffee. That was 4 months ago. I know how long it's been. Roz, I didn't tell anyone. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were streaming, and her voice was perfectly steady. I didn't tell my doctor for 6 weeks. Do you know why? Because I had decided it wasn't allowed. Because a woman who caused it doesn't get to also get better. That was the arrangement. That was the arrangement I made with myself in a hospital bed, and I have kept it for 22 months. And then a man with a mop went and looked at page 11. Wes put his hand on the arm of the chair next to hers. They're saying 8 to 14 months, she said. With a walker. Maybe canes. Nobody will promise me anything, and I've stopped asking them to. That's all right. It might be nothing. It's not nothing, Wes said. But it'd be all right if it was. She looked at him then, and he looked back. And downstairs a compressor cycled, and a pallet jack went by. I'm going to be a great deal of work, Rosalind said. I know it, said Wes. That's not a metaphor. There are catheters, and there are infections, and there are days I can't, and there is a chair in the trunk of a car for the rest of my life. And you have a 7-year-old. And I am not going to let you decide this on a mezzanine on a good day. Wes thought about that. June asked if she gets to keep you, he said. I know. I've been thinking about how to answer it for 11 days, and everything I came up with was a speech. He shrugged slightly. Then last night she got out of bed and asked me if you'd be at the meeting, and I said yes, and she said, good, because who else is going to read the numbers out loud? Rosalind laughed. It was a wreck of a sound, half a sob, and it was the first one. He took the tin out of the tote and put it on her lap. Inside, the 2 aluminum forks lay side by side on the visitor log, and down the flat of each one, where he'd stamped them at 4 that morning on the borrowed laser in the bay on South Hydraulic, ran 8 characters, the same 8 on both. The first ones the system ever issued. You stamped them, she said. They're load-bearing, Wes said. The first production part came off the line under Trueline on a Thursday in February, and it was a nothing part, a 5/8 shackle, the kind Keel made 900 of a week, the kind that goes in a box and goes on a truck and ends up in a yard in Kansas or Nebraska or Missouri holding up something ordinary. They made a small thing of it anyway. Second shift stayed. Reuben brought a sheet cake. Hattie from shipping cried, which she denied for the rest of her natural life. Dennis Roby held the part up under the light and read the 8 characters out loud, and then handed it to a 7-year-old in small gold glasses who read them out loud again correctly into a shop floor of 40 adults, because that was her job, and she had been doing it since November, and she was not about to be replaced now. Rosalind Keel watched it from the mezzanine, sitting with her hands on the rail. She had a walker by then that she hated and used anyway, 11 steps at a time, twice a day, in the physical therapy room at the hospital on Rock Road with a therapist named B, who did not take 1 ounce of nonsense from her. She would not do it at the plant. That took another year. She kept the letters. All 81. She had them bound and put on the shelf behind her desk next to her father's notebooks, spine out, where every person who ever came into that office would see them and eventually ask, and she never once softened the answer. Grant Merrick stayed. She kept him, which surprised the entire building and 1 or 2 of the directors, and when Priya asked her about it, Rosalind said, he was wrong the way people are wrong when they're afraid for you. I've got no shortage of people who are right about me from a distance. I've got exactly one who'd have laid down in traffic for my father. He flew to Fort Worth and Houston and Sioux Falls and did the traveling, and twice a year, without fail on a Saturday, he came and cleaned out her gutters and would not discuss it. Cyrus Bertram closed the inspection business that March. He was 61. He did not go quietly into anything. He went and got certified as a training instructor and spent the next 6 years teaching rigging classes at the community college for very little money, and he began every single semester the same way, with a story about a day in April when he had 4 sites on his schedule and a certificate in his hand, and did not put a glass on the part. He never asked her to forgive him. She never offered. What she did was put his class on the approved list for every one of Keel's customers, which is a different thing, and possibly a larger one. And in the spring, Wes Callahan drove out to a house he'd never been inside, on the east side that had been shut for 19 months, and helped a woman clear the dust sheets off her father's furniture, because she had decided she was going to live in it again. The mantel was where she said it would be. 2 turnbuckle bodies sat on it, side by side, a little crooked, dull with 2 decades of dust. 38 of them had passed. These were the 2 that hadn't, and August Keel had carried them home in his coat pocket and set them up there and never said a word about it to anybody. And his daughter had found them at 41 years old on the worst week of her life. She put the 2 cut aluminum forks up beside them. She had to be lifted to do it, and she asked to be, out loud without dropping her voice, and that was the part that made Wes have to go stand in the kitchen for a minute. This was not a rescue. That's the thing worth saying plainly, now that the rest of it is told. Nobody in this story was saved. A man with a mop did not repair a woman's spine and did not restore her company and did not fix, in any way that would show up in a ledger, one single circumstance of her life. The $410,000 was still gone. The 22 months were still gone. Her father was still dead in a hallway with a paper cup of coffee, and there is no ending anywhere that gives that back. What happened was smaller than a rescue and harder to do. A man heard a sound he could have ignored, and did not ignore it. He was told to put it back and throw it out and never speak of it, by a woman with every kind of power over him. At a moment when he had 11 days of savings and a daughter with a cracked molar, and he said no. And he kept saying it, quietly, for 4 months, without ever once telling her she was wrong about herself. That's all refusal is. It isn't heroic, and it doesn't feel brave from the inside. It's mostly just staying. Showing up on the 89th day when you got walked out on the 88th. Setting the chairs to the room instead of the table. Grinding a 2-inch lip flat on a Sunday for $41 nobody asked you to spend. People will tell you the world is fixed by the big gesture. It isn't. It's fixed by the person who looks at the thing everybody has agreed not to look at and says, that's not where. Rosalind Keel walked into her own boardroom on Keynes 18 months later, and it took her a long time to cross the room, and nobody in that company ever once suggested moving the meeting somewhere closer to the door. And in a house on the east side of Wichita, there is a mantle with 4 pieces of scrap metal on it, 2 that a girl of 15 made wrong, and 2 that somebody cut on purpose, and no plaque, and no explanation. Everyone who lives there knows what they are. That's enough.